Today, I have a very special guest. She's a physiotherapist and nervous system coach who's lived the thing we talk about every week on this show and then went and made it her life's work. Welcome, Emma Ferris. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me to speak about a very special topic to my heart, dating.
Exactly. So I'll just formally introduce you here. So Emma Ferris is a physiotherapist, nervous system coach, author, and speaker who founded The Breath Effect, work that sits at the intersection of clinical science and nervous system regulation. Emma works with women whose bodies have been asked to hold too much for too long through motherhood, caretaking, career, burnout, and the end of long relationships. After her own marriage ended and she survived a relationship with a man who turned out to be a con man, Emma became obsessed with the physiology of self-abandonment, why women override the signals their bodies are clearly sending, and what it takes to come back. Today, Emma helps women rebuild their signal so they can hear themselves again, recover from what's been, and stay themselves inside whatever comes next. So thank you so much for being here, Emma.
Thank you. It's an honor to speak about this.
So let's dive into kind of your story and, can you share with the audience how you went from being a physiotherapist to writing and speaking about relationships and how women show up in them? And was there a specific moment or incident that caused this pivot?
Probably a few. One would have been my separation and divorce, which is now about 9 years ago, 8-9 years ago. So I was kind of in my mid-30s. And it was very amicable. I've got 2 kids with my ex-husband, and we managed to separate in a very conscious way. Didn't mean that there wasn't grief with it, a lot of emotional turmoil. But when I came out of it, I remember feeling really strongly that I didn't want to repeat either the cycle that I'd gone through with that marriage, and that I wanted to make sure that who I was choosing, instead of it kind of just happening or evolving or being I don't know if you got this phrase over in Canada, white picket fence. So kind of going through the traditional, this is what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to get the job, the marriage, the kids. And it wasn't that truth. And so there's a lot of learning and grief and processing, even in just that first chapter. And then after that, I did the usual thing. I decided to get out dating after a few months of when we finally separated. And it was a kind of an exciting stage, actually, because I was very hopeful. I was very in a space where I thought, wow, this is going to be a bit of a learning about who I am. I felt like I didn't know in many ways who I was post-divorce, having kids. I met my ex-husband when I was 22. So at that stage, being around mid-30s, coming out into that was a really big shift in my world, as well as doing my business. And I was already coaching women and coaching men too at that time around how they deal with stress. And so I had several events in my life that were definitely my aha moments, as I call them. They kind of wake up and they're like, all right, haven't got the toolbox for this. We weren't given the skills. And then it wasn't till 2018 that I really had my pivot moment. I had been dating for a wee while. I had met some fabulous humans, but they weren't the humans for me. And because I lived at the end of not end of a road, but what is a road, but a very remote area in New Zealand, where I'm from, with my very strong Kiwi accent, there's only a very small dating population. So I decided to go online dating, which, is unfortunately traditional right now, instead of meet them at the local library or the pub or the gym. And it was actually, again, kind of an interesting experiment. I took it as an experiment. What am I going to learn about myself? Who am I going to meet? And it was in 2018 when I went through an experience of a loss of a friend of mine had lost her husband. And I remember meeting this person online and him being so comforting through that experience. It was kind of a strong trauma at that time that I was witnessing. It's still part of it, but it was not as big as what she was obviously going through. And when I met him, it was this weird experience of, I still had butterflies, but it was more, now I look back, and it was butterflies of like alert instead of butterflies of this is the right person. Over the next 6 months, and this is the short version because I've actually worked to tell the story in a few different ways so others can learn from it. Because I wouldn't be saying what I'm saying now if I haven't done so much work around this experience. And we decided to put this into a podcast. And I say we, being my sister who lives in London currently, and we've never done podcasts before that time. In 2020, when it came out, there was nothing that we were like, yeah, let's go tell stories of our dating life. That was never part of it. Never part of it.
It's a fantastic podcast. We'll have the link for that for sure. You definitely need to listen to that.
Yeah, we've been really lucky with the way it's been received, but I think because of the vulnerability that I share in it. So the short story, the podcast is Conning the Con, and it's under the Community podcast from my sister's now podcast media company that she started from my trauma. And
oh no,
yeah, good things come out of bad stuff is the way that I look at it. But it really, for me, it felt like it was in the New Zealand version of the Tinder Swindler or the Dirty John story without the extreme murder at the end. And so the con man ended up changing his name legally. And that was the hardest thing, because if I had his real name, and because I did Google him, my red flags went up at the start, because he was telling all these stories and just like story after story that was like, this is curious. I'm interested in this person. He's saying all the things that were on my like wish list, because I'd done a lot of work on what I wanted in my partner. I wanted the emotional availability. I wanted someone that had been on a similar wavelength to me, that maybe was an entrepreneur, that was maybe up and loving travel, that was open to having kids around them, but not that I wanted any more kids. So there was a lot of things that he was saying that at that start were good. And then a lot of things that were going off in my body that didn't feel right, but my brain, my good girl, people-pleasing brain, was overriding. So for the next 6 months, he kind of weaved his way into my life. And that first initial piece of him changing his name was the reason why I didn't find out that he had been to jail previously for being a con man.
Oh, my God.
Not to somebody he was dating. Yeah, not somebody he was dating, but somebody that he, 2 different cons before that in New Zealand. And then he'd done more in Australia where he was from. So there was a lot of deception, and I wasn't the only person that was taken, I guess, for a ride. But as the person that was dating him, it was a really horrific process to find out. And the big piece of it is, as it wasn't just emotional abuse with us, it was financial abuse. So I ended up investing, having my lawyers involved in it, having several people around me, fact-checking, doing the things that I thought I'd done. He set up companies that I found out were illegal afterwards because he couldn't do that after being in jail. And so many layers of deception. And as I look back now, I know that there were so many things that I was doing to be safe, to protect myself. But unfortunately, there's still people out there that can hurt and can behave in a way that just isn't kind and humane, is what I look at it. So over that 6 months, as he stole money through this investment scheme and paid little bits back, which is very much a traditional con process. And then he asked for a bigger chunk of money, which was and I'd been working really hard post-divorce with my business, with my young kids. And he knew that the driving force behind this was that I wanted time with my kids. Freedom was what I wanted. And money gave me freedom to be able to spend that, because I'd been working my butt off since I was very young, studying physio practices and just being on the go. So my nervous system itself was always in a survival state from a very, very young age. And so when I dated him, it ended up being that the day that I invested a hefty amount of money, I'm trying to think the conversion to Canadian dollars, but in New Zealand dollars or US dollars, it would be about 150,000 US dollars. So it was a huge amount, a lot. And it was really to do with my properties that I had, that I'd again worked hard for. My husband and I were self-made, and he invested that money. Well, I thought I was investing it into his companies to then get payouts and do the process all legally, all signed off. But the next day that after I'd done that, I found out his real name and who he was from my good friends that had dug deeper. They had red flags. They're like, we can't wait anymore. We don't know how we're going to find it. But they dug so deep, and they found out that he'd been in jail. So my world fell apart April the 9th, 2019. And it was then that I really understood the impact of this lived experience of shock trauma and how do we navigate through. And there was so many layers, because it wasn't just trauma around grief or loss. It was around betrayal and emotional abuse around there. And there was the biggest piece for me was understanding the safety response as a nervous system coach and physio, I was like, I had never really fully understood how strong our wiring was and how important it was for me to protect myself, and then how I had to recover. And we talk about people healing a lot. And it's like, for me, it was actually around understanding the science of it so that you could take control of what was happening in your body so that your emotions and your thoughts and your psychology could then come along for the ride. So the short story was that I could help catch him with the police, and that he went to jail. He's back out doing it again in Australia is the next layer on it. Yeah, they don't stop. And has got two court cases over there that is pending. So for me, sharing the story was a big deal, but so that other women don't go through, and men, but it's the majority is women that have been impacted by this behaviour. And there are low levels versions of this in every day when we're dating that I want women to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many layers to this, and I'm sure the women listening can resonate with that feeling of betrayal, because in, different circumstances, they may have overridden their intuition or their signals and then been betrayed or rejected in some way, and then end up closing their heart down. And so that's why this conversation is so important, to help them to open their heart again and move forward in a way that feels safe, and they can be more discerning. So in the podcast, I talk a lot about our intuition, listening to our intuition, trusting our intuition. And so in your situation, like, you talk about your nervous system and things, but what do you think your intuition was telling you, and why did it override those signals at the time, do you think?
It's a good question. I think part of it was where I was at that time. So my busyness, the survival state that my body was operating in from a very young age. And even though I'd been doing work on regulating my nervous system, a lot of breath work before that, a lot of emotional regulation, it was still on the state of like fear and safety around what was happening in my world post-divorce. And there's kind of the thoughts that were coming through that were like, you need to keep moving forward, you need to keep growing the business. There wasn't really this feeling of like, I'm okay, for a very long time. And so that, and when I learned about the science of this as well, it became really clear of how much, you talk about intuition, it's that gut brain, right? So it's that second brain that our body has that is actually working faster than our mind. And so for me, I felt these sensations, but I was taught that butterflies were actually often like a ooh sensation, or like excitement. And then again, I was also taught to be the trust first, which feels like a really good thing to have. But unfortunately, when it comes to building relationships, you've actually got to fact check and just be like, check in with yourself around stuff. Because I wasn't, I've actually had to really work hard to both find my voice and challenge people through my life. And that is important in dating, so that you can have constructive conversations to dig deeper and not just believe when someone says, well, of course it's this way. This is, I had to erase my identity because I had somebody going after me and it was awful, and I had a PR company do this. So you won't find evidence of me. And I remember having those moments where I was like, okay, I'm going to go fact check that. And so I did. I was like Googling away, being like, okay. And then I couldn't find the evidence. I was like, okay, this is weird. But it was still this accumulation of what was happening at the time. And I think the big lessons as well was how you feel. This came from one of the psychologists that we had on Conning the Con podcast, is how you feel after you're with that person is actually what you want to be listening into. How do they leave you feeling? Okay, because that's a embodied state. And because so many of us, and me at that time particularly, was very much in my head. Who am I showing up dating? How am I going to be perceived? All these things around, I'm a divorcee, I've got 2 kids, like who's going to want this package? And yet it was finding someone that seemed to be on the same wavelength, that seemed to be speaking the same language, that then piqued my interest. So my intuition, I would say, was just overridden.
Exactly. And then you had said earlier about the people pleasing thing that was running also in the background. And, there's some stories that we tell ourselves, like that maybe, I used to tell myself like, I'm at the age where I have to take what I can get. And there's a huge scarcity around choices. And so I better just try to make this work. And that was a lot of what I you try really hard to make something work until it's like, wow, this is really a lot of work. So I totally understand that. So in the clinical terms, what do you think, what's actually happening in a dysregulated body so that women can kind of check in and say what makes it mistake familiarity for safety and intensity, like you were saying, the butterflies and that feeling of maybe adrenaline, so that women can kind of see how they might be feeling and check it against themselves.
So I think if we take it away from dating for a second and you just look at where you are in your state. So we talk about state, we're talking about the way that the mind and the body and our emotions are reacting to stress around us. And that all comes down to survival response. And dating brings it in because we're trying to figure out if this human around us is going to be safe or not. And so when we're looking at the way that stress is impacting us, that's going to be from our childhood, from what we were taught about our reactivity to people. So again, if we've been taught that we've got to be the people pleaser, if we want to, play small, or we want to be able to make sure that we're not offending people because we're being the good girl, then our body and our even our breathing and our emotions will all shift to that state. When it comes to noticing what that looks like, let's talk about three different states, or three different kind of ways that we can show up. And there is three good versions and three bad versions of that. The ideal version is the green state, okay, this regulated state, which makes you feel calm, connected, safe, usually good energy, feeling like you are playful, curious, and from a body point of view, your muscles are relaxed, you feel your breathing relaxed, your heart rate's low, your stomach can be gurgling, you can notice how your body is just in this place of gentleness and softness. And so even just noticing that now, if you're in that state for the listeners, is quite an important one. And then we have these two extremes where the nervous system is working to try and come back to this homeostasis, or this balance point. So the red state being the survival state, and that was kind of where I operated in a lot, high energy, high on the go, type A personality, and that kind of driver was very much using the sympathetic nervous system, or the flight, fight, or freeze, on the go a lot. So my body was breathing faster, particularly from my childhood. I used to have a stutter and a speech impediment, and I was constantly like, okay, I've got to be okay. I've got to be okay. What does this look like to be safe in the world? And so your heart rate's going to be up, your digestion's going to be altered, whether that you want to consume more food or that your stomach feels more shut down. Your blood pressure goes up. You're going to feel more tension and trigger points in the body. So they could be neck, back, jaw, headaches, migraines, all these little symptoms that your body is actually whispering and then often shouting to you that I'm not in a state of regulation, that green zone. And so you can swing between those. We know this is going to change for the day depending on who you're with and how do you feel with them. And when you were taught about this growing up, about relationships, those are then going to come up into your adult dating relationships. And that's the amazing thing I remember learning years ago, is that how that brain circuitry around your parenting relationships is literally the circuitry you're going to use when you're dating. So if you've had issues in the past around your childhood, around that's going to trigger the survival response around people. So you might also be one that then goes, oh, if I'm in that red state, that means I'm going to be connected with this person. That's what relationship looks like, okay? And then the blue state is the one that I think is really important for women to look at, because this is all of this is around our hormones as well. So our stress response is one of the three legs of our hormone stool in our nervous system. So whether it's your thyroid, sex hormones, or your stress hormones. And that's a whole other podcast and a whole other chapter. But what it does is, when we're staying in this dysregulated state, often swinging between the red and the blue, the nervous system goes, sheepers, can you just give me a break? Like, this is just too hard. So we go to the blue state, which is that shutdown. And in there, we can actually, this is to do with our vagus nerve, the nerve that keeps us calmer normally. But if that's not working in the right way, if we're not learning how to regulate and bring ourselves back into that green state, we then feel low mood, low energy. We feel a lot of anxiety. Our breathing pattern changes. Again, we can move into a sad breathing pattern versus the anxiety, fast breathing pattern in the red state. And so we're very unconscious, but this is being driven by what's around us. So the short answer is, we can get caught out with these states, and the green version of kind of bad, I guess I'd say, is people pleasing. So that is the state where we think about, we're going, okay, I'm still, I'm feeling good. This is fine. Okay, no, I can override it. I'm feeling good. But we're not actually really tuning into what's going on. And we need to be able to just move between these states, because the good versions of those states is, particularly with the green, red and blue, is intimacy. So we need to be able to have a regulated state to be able to have good sex, have good relationships, and deal with tough moments, which is really what is going to help us as humans connect. So for me, it's a really important pillar to understand, oh, actually, what if this is one of the puzzle pieces I'm missing in my relationship, is how I'm showing up.
Quick note, if you're dating after 40 and wondering where to focus your time, I made a free guide for you. It's called The Top 5 Dating Apps for Women Over 40 and How to Spot Unavailable Guys Fast. It shows you where emotionally available guys are actually showing up and how to avoid wasting time on the wrong ones. You can download it right now at stopchasingunavailableguys.com. Okay, back to the episode. Exactly. And being in your body, as you're saying, like this is really helpful information that I'm sure everyone's taking a lot of notes right now. So going back to the dating, so there's so many things it seems to think about when you're dating and preparing to be, going on the apps. And there's a lot of advice out there and a lot of things that might be in the latest, article or whatever online about dating. And I'm just curious, what do you see in the women over 40 group who are listening to this podcast who are looking for a healthy relationship that the advice industry is missing right now, or that feels like is a big gap for them?
Well, I think it's as simple as that, as are you regulated? So before we're coming into relationship, there's all this piece around work on yourself, like do all this work, inner work. And like that's actually really hard to explain what that looks like. And so I want people to understand what it means to build your world without another partner in there. And that's a big part of when you come into a relationship in a safe, regulated state, you're then going to be able to pick the people that are going to also be that secure attachment. I'm probably sure you've talked about attachment styles in this podcast already, but that place where you can begin to register, they've got ways to regulate emotionally, and I've got ways to regulate emotionally, and I can sit with the tough moments. So learning to do your self-regulation, which means understanding your nervous system, and so that you can be able to deal with the moments for yourself, but then learning to co-regulate is also something that I think isn't talked about enough. And this is around, again, evolutionary response to be in relationship, and how much when we are under threat from those relationships, it triggers our stress response. So we need to be able to have this toolbox, both around communication, around how we express our emotions, how our body rides that roller coaster, because our body is keeping the score on it. So when I think probably the biggest advice or tip that I'll be working on for people is going, you need to learn how to work with your body. So not just from what do we eat, being the right weight and exercising enough. This is like, those things are not the pillars. It's how you look after your nervous system, which helps you to understand when I'm moving into relationship, how am I going to be my best version where I'm less reactive, I can still find my voice, and I can make sure that I'm not going to repeat the cycles that have happened in my past. And so when I look at that's for me, and it seems really basic. As a physiotherapist, one of the first pillars that I work with people on is how they breathe, because that is the easiest way to access the safety state and that green state in the nervous system. And so that can be operating on a subconscious pattern that is keeping them either in the red state or the blue state. And so if you think about going into a dating environment with that red state, that's you aren't embodied. You aren't listening in. And that's going to make a big difference to the way that you are perceived from the other partner, and therefore how you're going to co-regulate.
I love this conversation on co-regulation, because a lot of the work that I did and working with women, there's so much isolation. So, with a lot of trauma and toxic relationships and things you have to learn, there's the tendency to really want to be isolated when you do this. And I like how you're saying, you can only get to a certain point regulating yourself, and then you have to go and co-regulate and actually get out and meet people and talk to them and start doing things in real time. So I like how you're highlighting that, because it's such an important piece. We can't, heal or embody to the full extent if we're, stuck at home in our room, not wanting to talk to anyone. So this is a really important conversation to talk about.
And that's really that blue state though, Eleanor, as well, right? So that's when people understand when we go shut down because we've been hurt. That's when we move into this place of avoidance. And actually, it's around building your circle and your world outside of the dating aspect before you go out there, because you want to make sure that you've got that. The green state needs social connection. And the more that you build social connection in other ways, you learn to be in relationship with friends, with people. It might be going to the gym. It could be going to quiz nights. Like those things that build your world to test it out are really important. And I think that's what we've got to think about regulation. It's like a muscle in the body. You've got to train it. It's not suddenly going to be like, oh, cool, I can deal with anything in my life that's going to be thrown at me. It's not the way. You've actually got to work hard at listening in, catching the nervous system when it gets triggered, and then bringing it back down and understanding why, and then making sure that you can move forward from that and process it.
That's very good. So I was kind of thinking about something when you were talking about the rebuilding trust and then using it in co-regulation. So like you were saying, there's so much talk about self-regulation, but not much about the co-regulation. So can you go into a little more about that part, and why does it matter for anyone entering a relationship?
I think that's because we are constantly reading each other as humans. So there's parts in our brain called the mirror neurons. And this is important for us to, in any relationship. So when we were a child, we were mirroring and looking at what our parents were doing and going, they're smiling, I will smile. Like it's a real basic response to reading other humans. It's why AI is not going to be able to date us technically, because they can't read what we're saying, what our emotions are. Yet. And the key thing with that is making sure that you understand that this is on the whole time. You're not just like switching this off. That is a state that is happening whenever you enter any room, whether it's at work, whether it's at home. You are constantly reading other humans. And so that's going to be from their facial expression, that's going to be from their body language, and it's going to be from their breathing. And so what you need to look at is what you can control and what is out of your control. The way that you show up is 100% in your control. So if we think about how we're going to co-regulate somebody, this is not about if somebody is always in a stress state as a partner. We don't want someone that can't regulate or can't bring themselves down, or that you're trying to, if you've been in an abusive relationship, it's not trying to people please or fawn, as we talk about, which is part of the other nervous system states, to protect. This is around being able to build connection and build conversation when we notice something's going on with another person. But we also know when we are in a regulated state, this is important for any age and stage. So if we're calm, we're relaxed, we're heart-centered, we will then, without doing anything else, co-regulate the people around you. And you can think of examples when you've been in space where people are, I think of like the dark clouds, and they come into the room and you're like, oh, and you react, right? And they haven't even said a word, but they are radiating both from their heart, and it sounds weird, heart energy, but the heart has an electromagnetic field. We are picking up on it every time we're around somebody. That connects with the nervous system. You're watching their breathing, you're watching their facial expressions. And so our brain is detecting if we are safe or not. Is this a threat? And that really comes down to our primitive response around when we were in our tribe, particularly for women, because if we were in a group of women that made us feel safe, our nervous system would feel calm and connected, because as I guess prehistoric as it sounds, the men were out hunter-gathering and women were there to support each other and look after the babies and look after anybody that was sick. And so while those old states and wiring are still in our modern day lives, as women, if we are not in good relationships with other women, we also have our stress system come up. And if we're not in good relationships with our partner, our stress system goes up. So it's around learning to listen into that and then shift it so that you can be clearer on, what do I feel? What do I feel? And therefore, how am I going to express it to the human that's in front of me in the way that it's going to be received? If I go there in a state of dysregulation, so red state, oh, I'm so angry at you, I can't believe you've behaved this way. Oh, that's never going to be received. If we can change that state, so we go, right, I'm gonna go calm myself down, and I'm going to come back, and then can we have a conversation? And then we can begin to connect in a way that's very different. I felt this, and someone can then begin to listen and hear. So that's where we build a very different model of communication. And I think that even like we said in this stage and age of dating in our 40s, there is this piece where I think there's an opportunity, because we're not dating the 20-year-olds. Well, hopefully, probably not dating 20-year-olds, but when we were in our 20s and when we were in our 30s, this is around finding people that have grown in this emotional intelligence and then this embodied intelligence. Okay, so there's three intelligence. There's the mind, the embodied, and then there's the emotional intelligence. And so the more that you build up your embodied intelligence, you then can learn to connect differently with other humans. And I think that's what can be confusing to people, is when they first go and date somebody that might be embodied or calm, they go, no, this doesn't feel exciting. This doesn't feel good to me. This is not what I've been used to. And actually, you've got to sit with it and learn to repattern what you've been programmed to.
And definitely talk a lot about that, around feeling like the calm, regulated person is boring. And I've definitely been through that in my life, where it's like, oh, there's no spark, there's no connection. Let's just move on. And really being able to actually think about that and tune into, wouldn't this be actually an amazing experience to have with someone who is calm and and healthy. The other thing I like is talking about the heart. I don't know if you know the Heart Math. There's Heart Math Institute. Yeah.
So they've done a lot of work on that, right? A lot of work around the science of the heart.
I love how they actually can measure that, and they can tell, how big a person's heart radius is and all of these amazing things around the heart and it being ahead of the brain and all of these things. So that it's definitely something to, if anyone's listening and wants to learn more about that, because we're told, our brain is the end all be all, possibly like intelligence is the thing to get you out of any situation. And it's actually been proven time and time again that the brain is the worst thing to get you out of any situation. So
absolutely. And I love that, because the heart sends 3 times the information up to the brain, then the brain sends down. So there is so much communication, and this is where it connects to the nervous system, because when we talk to nervous system, that's the wiring that connects the mind and the body, and your heart and your lungs are like the central pieces to it. Okay. And the vagus nerve, which controls that heart, torus, and energy, is what you're really changing when we're doing work around the nervous system, okay, which then helps the gut relax. It's all on the same loop, but it's kind of thinking of it like the conductor that has been conducting it too fast or conducting it, making it sound really terrible. You've got to then learn to come into that space where we do connect and we do understand the heart. And it is not just a physical beating heart. It is important. It is an electrical heart, and it is an emotional heart. And I think that is a really powerful tool to have for women as well. When I work with women's group coaching as well, we use a lot of compassion training. So I love a lot of Kristen Neff's work, Dr. Kristen Neff, if you've seen her stuff. Oh, she is phenomenal. And when you see the science behind it, you go, oh, well, I can do this. First of all, I can do this. And I can see why it's connected instead of it feeling woo-woo.
And it feels really good when you start to learn about what the body can do and what the body can tell you. And, aside from the mind going ping-ponging all over the place. But kind of going back a little bit, with anyone who's listening to this and wants to kind of really get started with this, like, where does the work even begin with this?
I think it's around getting the right support. If you haven't ever done this kind of inner work, which as a coach of women as well, I think that is around finding communities that can help you, first of all, fact check, sense check the body. What is it coming up? So finding your community of people that work with in your own world. And then if you want to go deeper, I think it's around imagining you have this invisible toolbox that's going to help you both with relationships and particularly dealing with stress. So if you can begin to start understanding how your stress system has been the catalyst in many ways to keep you in these states, that's what gives you power. So that's not just enough to go and do some mindfulness courses that do help. And it's not just enough to do therapy, because that's not usually embodied. So for me, it's around finding the communities that will help you shift that state and create awareness. I run quite a few different programs and a lot of online courses. My first pillar is always coming back to the breath and trying a 30-day challenge around, okay, how my breathing pattern is sitting, which feels kind of weird to be like, how's that going to make me date better? But it does, because it connects to the nervous system. And the more that you can regulate yourself, you can then shift that way that you're going to connect. So that's my starting pillar, is in 30 days, change your breathing pattern, and then begin to build your other toolbox around emotional regulation, around your world, and beginning to understand why I react the way that I am. And when we look at this, understanding that your nervous system, which is this hidden operating system, isn't something that is stuck, but if it's been operating in a certain way for a very long time, it's going to take time to change it. So giving yourself this grace and bandwidth, it's like we kind of think suddenly we're going to lose weight, or we're going to change my diet, or I'm going to sleep really well because I've changed this one thing. I'm like, no, it is giving your body signals, I am safe. So you have to do that constantly. Okay. You have to keep coming back to, how do I shift this? What am I going to control? And then working on things around your sleep, and particularly for women in their 40s, we're also coming into this lovely stage of perimenopause, which is going to trigger anxiety because of our progesterone going down, and that affects what we call GABA receptors in our brain. So there's several things that are actually part of this experience where we are. So for me, learning to regulate your nervous system and then putting these tools in place, finding what works for you. So there'll be tools for around crisis and tools that are for you when you are just trying to build the stretch and bandwidth that you have. That's what's really important. So I work with lots of women around the world that kind of, that are ready to make these change. And it brings me so much joy when they create awareness, because that's what we're really doing. It's compassion and awareness and regulation combined to give you this invisible toolbox that helps you ride the waves.
Yes, exactly. Very, very helpful. And so thinking about your story and other women who might feel, I've talked about this before, where it's like you just heal and heal and heal, and then kind of lose yourself, or feel like, the woman who's scared, like, what if I heal and then I don't have my edge anymore, or my awareness, and lose certain things about themselves? What do you say to that part?
Well, I've been there in the first place. I would say that it's an evolution. So who you are in the past is always going to be changing. The future you is waiting for you to evolve into a different way. I don't think you lose the edge. I think you gain skills, and I think you gain a way of operating that is actually safer. And you should not lose your softness. You should never lose that. You actually become strong and soft together. And this is kind of some of the stuff that's out there. It's the feminine, it's the masculine, all the things that are out there in the universe and the internet. And it's like, actually, this is around you understanding who you are and why you operate the way you are, what happened to you to cause it. And so there is nothing wrong with evolving, but you're still going to be your true core human that you are, with your strong values. It's around giving yourself space and time to move from the past and then move into this next stage, which you do get to choose. You do get to choose how you're going to operate.
And I mean, I always say that you can only become more of your true self and become more of who you're really meant to be. And that's, it's not losing, it's stepping into more of yourself, really. So love that. So just kind of bringing this all together. If you want someone to remember just one thing from this conversation we've had, which has had so many elements, so many very helpful things in it, what do you want that to be that someone would remember?
The simple thing for me is that you have the power to change your state and how you then show up for yourself in the first place. So that self-regulation is the first pillar. And then as you begin to do more of that, if you just focus on that piece of how you are and how you look after your own health and well-being, that's going to then ripple out and have a huge but beautiful knock-on effect to the world around you. People that you draw in, the work that you do, and therefore the relationships you're going to attract. So you must first learn to self-regulate before you can co-regulate. But you have the power. You may not have the tools just yet, but go be a hunter for ways that you can empower yourself to be the resilient woman that you want to be in relationship in all aspects of your life.
Very beautifully said. And I really appreciate this whole conversation, and especially sharing your very personal story and bringing in those elements. So you're not someone just talking from, books or theory. It's from your own personal experience, which is carries a lot of weight for people listening. And so I really appreciate you being here, Emma. And can you tell the women how they can find you, or some where they can go to find out more about you. And we're going to have some, the links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is the breath effect. So that's my business name, and you can search it, Google it, and it's also Instagram. Probably the easiest way to follow, learn tools from me is on Instagram. So at the breath effect, and Emma Ferris, Ferris. My last name is like Ferris wheel. And the easiest ways to kind of work with me is probably starting at the basics. So I have a 30-day breathing challenge that people can do to help shift that state. And if it's like, where do I even start here. And then moving through into, if you feel like you want to, I've got group coaching. So my women's groups, usually over 10 weeks, the resilience room, which is around building this toolbox and in safety. And there's group of women that are also on this journey, maybe not all dating, but all going, how do I build my bandwidth? How do I build my resilience? And if you really, really want a different experience, an immersive experience, I have a retreat in Bali once a year that is all around the nervous system, all around creating the world that you want and the life that you want. And it is a fabulous place to both take space, because we don't often as women, and that to me is one of the most powerful tools. So I'd love to work with any women that are looking at changing the way they show up for their loved ones.
Yes, wonderful. Well, Bali sounds amazing. And yeah, I recommend you go and check out Emma's website and start from here. And thank you for listening. And remember, love is closer than you think. Thanks for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps more women find this show. More support and free resources are at stopchasingunavailableguys.com. That's stopchasingunavailableguys.com. I'm Truly Eleanor. See you next time.